day, friends, and welcome to our virtual teaching space. I am so grateful that you are joining us here today. As you're coming in, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. We're on this Lenten journey together, talking about how in the world do we put it all on the altar, and what do we put on the altar. And so I want to invite you once again as we look together at Genesis chapter 22. I pray you've been trekking along with us. If you've missed some days, feel free to go back on our social media platforms and you can always catch up with us. Genesis chapter 22. And once again, you're going to get tired of verse 2, but there's so much to tell in verse 2. Go with me to Genesis chapter 22, verse 2. It says these words, "Then God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Today, I want to talk about put your familiar on the altar. Put your familiar on the altar. Rick Warren says these words, "Familiarity breeds complacency." That it is possible that you can get too familiar with something, hear me closely, that it makes you lazy and stop trying anymore. In our text today, God calls Abraham to offer up his son Isaac as a sacrifice on the altar. And we've explored what Isaac symbolizes. And I've told you that Isaac symbolizes future that Abraham has to put on the altar, his fortune that Abraham has to put on the altar. But today I want to suggest to you that Isaac also represents Abraham's familiar. Let the church type familiar. Abraham is the one who has seen Isaac every day. Hear me, they walked together, they worked together, they played together, they served together, they ate together. Abraham saw Isaac grow up and poured much into his life and much wisdom into his life. For Abraham, seeing Isaac was expected. It was an everyday thing. Abraham makes breakfast in the morning. Who he gonna see? Isaac. He goes to the field to work. Who's he gonna see? Isaac. He calls a family meeting, has a family reunion. Who's he gonna see? Isaac. Abraham was very familiar with his son, Isaac. Yet God calls Abraham to put his son, a sign of familiarity, on the altar as a sacrifice. Once again, God calls Abraham to put his son, a sign of familiarity, on the altar as a sacrifice. Isaac continues to represent many things for us today, but namely the familiars of our life. God calls Abraham to take one of the most familiar things he's ever known and give it up to the Lord. And today, God may not be calling you to give up your child, but God is calling you to give up something that you have gotten way too familiar and comfortable with. Hear me, there are some people we've gotten too familiar with, some places we've gotten too familiar with, and some habits that we are all too familiar with. Let's be real. Our past is a super familiar place. History is a super familiar place. And while it feels good to stay where we are and do what we've always done, God invites us to take a step out of our comfort zone and follow him into something new. Let's be real. Our comforts are a familiar place. You know, you got that one meal, that one person, that one place that you call your favorite. But God beckons for you today to get up and try something new. Here's why. We must detach ourselves from what simply feels good and attach ourselves to doing things that will produce some good. And that requires us sometimes to give up what we know and follow God into the unknown. You don't get it like that. Paul says it like this. We must forget what we're used to seeing so that we have the opportunity to see something we've never seen before. We must sacrifice being comfortable and familiar for our own growth and for our own gain. And if we keep doing what we've been doing, then we will never experience the newness of God. Yeah. If you look again at our text, you got to remember who Isaac is. Abraham and Sarah wanted a child. They prayed for a child. They got old in age, gave up on the dream, but eventually the Lord tells them that they're going to have a child in their old age. They finally get Isaac, their child, their baby boy, and they get used to him. And maybe like some of us, they stop petitioning and praying and spending time with God when they wanted something. It's like when you spend a whole bunch of years praying to get something and you finally get it. And then some of us stop talking to God because you got what you wanted from God and you became too familiar with the gift of God. And God says to Abraham, I know I gave you this, Isaac, but don't forget about the giver, God. Don't get too familiar with the thing that you forget the one who gave you the thing in the first place. I know you got the job that you prayed for. I know you got the boo or the bae that you asked for. I know you got the increase that you so desperately wanted. But don't you stop praying to God. Don't you stop depending on God. Don't you get too familiar with God that you forget the things that got you here in the first place. I'm done. But the good news of the text is that God telling Abraham to put Isaac, a sign of the familiar, on God's altar, tells us that God has more beyond where we are and what we're used to. That's good news. That if we give up the familiar, he will introduce us to something new and something we had never experienced before. And somebody needs to know that the only way you're going to move forward and the only way you're going to progress in life and the only way you're going to experience the newness of God is if you learn how to let go of some of the familiar, let go of some of the comforts, let go of some of the laziness and follow God into the newness of life. Somebody needs to know that what you have is not all God has to offer. What you're trying to hoard is not all God has in store for you. Where you are is not all of where God wants to take you. Who you've been is not all of who God wants you to be. God will lead us into new life, into new opportunities. God will open new doors. God will release new blessings if we relinquish the familiar in our life that we have been holding on to for such a long time. Friends, today, I invite you to put your familiars on the altar and be open to what God has for you next. I want you to stay connected with us, friends, as we continue on this journey of exploring this relationship of Abraham, Isaac, and God in this Lenten season. You can do so by continuing to join us on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok, whatever way you get it. We want you to get this word. Not only get this word, we want you to share this with others around you. So please take a moment to like and to share and to subscribe to make sure that you stay in tune with us. Friends, I'm praying for you, and I hope you are praying for me as well as we learn how to put it all on the altar, even the familiar things. I know it hurts, but God is still able. I've been Pastor Young, and I'll see you tomorrow.